the Gold Key Comics. This is episode 39.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casco, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
You know, it's the decade that saw the breakup of the Beatles, the Kent State shootings, gasoline lines, and Watergate. And those weren't the only bad things that happened in the 70s. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. That's right. It's the 70s. And during this decade, we also had Star Trek comic books by Gold Key. Ooh. We're going to discuss these in just a moment.
Yeah, but first we want to tell you how to reach us. Just go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/70s Trek. And feel free to leave us a comment or a question while you're there. And you can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com.
And don't forget, you can find this show on iTunes by searching 70s Trek in the podcast section. Please consider leaving us a rating or review. This helps other fans find our show.
Well, you know, Kelly, there's no way of putting this episode off. We had to get to it at some point.
We tried, didn't we?
We did. We've been coming up with a lot of other ideas. We did Doug Drexler for 3 episodes, knowing that the Gold Key comics were on the horizon, and we're just going to have to talk about them. You know, the Gold Key comics are often overlooked in Star Trek history. They were the first comic adaptions of the original series, and they're notable for that. They're also notable for having very little to do with Star Trek that fans saw in syndication during the 1970s. But you know what? Let's talk a little bit about these books. Kelly, why don't you start?
All right. Let's start with Gold Key. So Gold Key was an imprint of Western Publishing, also known as Whitman Comics. Western started publishing in 1962, and they ran all the way through 1984. Now, at the time, Gold Key was one of the few major American publishers of comic books that never displayed the seal from the Comics Code Authority on its covers.
Isn't that interesting?
That is incredible.
How'd they get away with that?
Do you know what? I don't know. And of course, this is the same one, and we'll talk about it, but some of the content they did, it's like, okay, maybe they didn't need to.
Right, exactly.
So during the 60s, Gold Key created comic book adaptations of a lot of different TV shows. Also did Disney and Warner Brother cartoon characters.
You know, just to jump in here, they did an Adam 12 comic book.
Yes, I saw that in the research. Dark Shadows.
All kinds of stuff.
All kinds of stuff, yep. From 67 to 78, Gold Key published Star Trek comic books. Writers of these books included George Kasdan, Arnold Drake, and Len Wein, who would later work for Marvel and DC.
Yeah, and I think he... didn't he do Justice League and even, I think, the X-Men, right, at one time?
Yeah, I know X-Men for sure.
Yeah, big famous guy in comic world. Originally, the books were illustrated by an Italian artist. His name was Alberto Giolitti. And what was interesting about this is that he had never seen the TV series. All he had was these publicity stills that the studio sent him. And so he was creating, you know, Kirk, for example, from one publicity shot, or the Bridge of the Enterprise from one publicity shot. So, and we'll talk about this more, but throughout the series, there are some things that don't look quite right. One of those includes Scotty. Giolitti never received a publicity shot of Jimmy Doohan, so he didn't know how to draw Scotty. So in these early issues before he got a publicity shot, Mr. Scott does not look like Mr. Scott.
No, he doesn't.
No, he looks kind of like a young Trevor Howard. Anyway, so the first 9 issues featured cover designs that included photos from the show. And they were kind of neat, graphic designs. The rest of the covers then all have unique comic artwork.
And do you know who did that artwork?
No, do you?
That was George Wilson. And he was a Gold Key artist that did several of the covers for other Gold Key comics. He did 48 of those.
They're very unique.
Yes.
Then they definitely have their own style. Like they're very different from anything that you ever see Star Trek related. Don't you think?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I liked some of them. I got actually more into the cover art than I did anything else.
There was one I really, really liked. I actually have it framed. It's from, and I'm pulling it up here. Here it is. Okay. It is issue number, what issue is that? Oh, crap. I can't believe I can't find it on here. It's of the back of the Enterprise, and the shuttle is leaving it. And it's really, really a beautiful painting. And it says Spock versus Slot in a world against itself. But I love the artwork on that cover. It's beautiful. So I framed it up and, there you go. That's the story about that.
Nice.
Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, Gold Key published Star Trek comics until 1978. And at that time, the motion picture was in full production, and Paramount wanted the comics to reflect the new movie. So they ended their license with Gold Key, which was probably a really good idea, and awarded it to Marvel. There was one restriction when Marvel took over. Marvel could not refer to the original series in any way. All the stories had to build off of the motion picture. So when Kelly and I, I know, isn't that interesting? They did not want to touch on the original series at all. So Kelly and I, when we looked at the Gold Key comics, we split up the 61 issues. And what we thought we would do is, rather than give you a blow-by-blow synopsis of plots, we thought we would give you our impressions instead of these Gold Key books. So, Kelly, why don't you start us off?
All right. Well, where to start, but we'll start with issue number 1.
Oh, God, no. Not issue 1.
And let's just say it's a planet of plant people, and the Enterprise, just disregards the Prime Directive and wipes out the whole planet.
Holy crap. I know. I have that in my notes, too. Are you kidding me?
Unbelievable.
Throughout the entire series, this is the show that said we respect life. We go out of our way to protect life whenever we can. The Corbomite maneuver was about, at the end of that show, if you remember, here's this alien that's been screwing with us, and when they finally have a blowout of their engines and it looks like they're hurt, the crew of the Enterprise turns around and helps them.
Right.
And here we are blowing the hell out of this world full of these sentient plants just because they're kind of mean.
Basically genocide.
Yes. Yes, it was.
Now, if this was like the alternate universe, okay, maybe I could see that.
Maybe I could see that. And quite frankly, since you brought that up, I feel like that's what the Gold Key comics are showing us. An alternate universe of Star Trek. Actually, that's a great way of looking at it.
Yes, exactly.
Suddenly, they became a little more palatable.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. So there's things like Yeoman Rand's in this issue. One of the few that she's in. I think there's only 2 maybe. Kirk calls her honey.
Yeah.
Honey.
How about her red thing on top of her head?
Oh yeah. I don't know.
You can tell Giolitti did not know what was going on with her hair.
Not at all.
And so the top part, which was, that braided look, he made that red. So it looks like she's wearing a basket.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It was I didn't know how to place it, but yes, a basket.
A red woven basket.
Right. The photos he got from the studio must have all been black and white because
that's what I'm thinking too.
well, since we're on clothes. Oh my gosh, I think he intended Spock to be the main character in all of these comics because Spock is the only one with a colored shirt other than this greenish yellow look.
Yeah, and he's the only one who looks like himself.
Right.
Everybody else looks not even close.
There's attempts throughout the run where they might get McCoy's face just one image in a whole comic.
Wouldn't you say it's like one panel out of 20?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Easy. The lack of knowing anything about science in this universe. A phaser is called a blast ray.
Again, he never saw the show. So,
right.
But you would have thought that Desilu would have sent over some notes. Apparently, they didn't.
Maybe a couple. Maybe this is the whole reason why there's, Bibles or whatever they call it for shows now that you have to stay canon. You got to stay on track here.
If you remember when we talked about the James Blish books and those adaptions, Blish was working from scripts that were like first drafts and it was stuff that never appeared on TV. And so I wonder if, and that was bad follow through in the Star Trek office that sent him those things.
Right.
My guess is the same thing is happening here. It's bad follow through from Star Trek and Desilu. Hey, Gabe, we got this deal, this license deal. Yay, it's money for us from Gold Key. Great. Just send them some stills and let's move on.
Yeah.
I kind of think that might be happening here.
I definitely think so. Staying on technology, they call the transporter a materialization beam.
Oh, yeah.
Go to the Enterprise, and this is encompassing several issues, but the transporter room, it's like they're in a glass egg-shaped thing with two machine-like things on either end, and you got to enter through a glass door to get beamed out and in.
Right. You could tell that he had some stills maybe that he was looking at, but he did not have all the continuity or all the context.
Right. Interesting note on the cover of the first episode. If you look at, and these are production stills, right? Pictures, Spock's picture looks like it's maybe a pre-production of the pilot even. I don't know if you looked at it real close, Bob, but the rank stripes are different.
Keep going. I'm looking right now.
Yeah. So it's more like the rank stripes that you saw on the pilot episode.
It is. It's from Where No Man Has Gone Before.
But then you have the collar, which is more like the series collar.
Actually, it's from, and I take that back, I believe it's from the Corbomite maneuver.
Yeah.
If you remember, he had a thicker collar that did not come to a point in the front. And I think that's what that is.
Okay.
But you're right. Good pickup. Now, did you notice? I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Did you notice the photo on the back of the cover? It's of Kirk, and he's holding a microphone with a cord.
Yes.
And he's near some machine that's got dials.
Yes.
So clearly, the artist looked at that and said, "Oh, well, the captain often holds a microphone with a cord because we see it in issue 1."
Yes.
When I saw that, I couldn't believe it.
I know, and it's so bad. If you remember, the game show. Oh gosh, what's it called?
Match Game with Gene Rayburn. Yes, it looks like that microphone.
Exactly like that microphone.
That's funny.
But then, so I'm going to jump to the second issue. I'm not going to give any background on the story.
Thank you very much.
Spock is talking into a ham radio. It literally is a drawn ham radio with the mic is sitting on a desk, with a little key thing. The back looks exactly like a ham radio.
So just to jump in here with you. So this is what happens throughout this entire series. There are 1970s references throughout it. Terms used, 1970s equipment, like you just pointed out, a ham radio.
Yep.
One of the issues I read, they talked about this new invention, the videotape recorder. At one point, the bad guy is talking about his evil plan, and he says, and then I'll get back to my apartment and I'll make a phone call. What? Make a phone call? Are you kidding me?
Yep. It's crazy. The stuff they have. So in issue 2, I start looking really close at the inside of the Enterprise. And to me, it looks like a submarine. I thought first it was like Flash Gordon, but then I looked closer and no, it looks exactly like a submarine.
That's interesting. That's probably maybe the closest thing he could compare it to.
Well, right. And so to top that off, and what really solidified it for me is they talk about put up the infrared periscope so we can see what kind of turbulence is out there.
Oh, God.
Unbelievable. Galaxy. They talk about solar systems as galaxies.
Yes. In issue 1, we're in the Alpha Galaxy.
Yeah.
What? No, you're not.
Issue 2, you're in the Naboo Galaxy. And
that's what Lost in Space does, not Star Trek.
Right. Issue 4, Galaxy Telpha Z. I mean, cool name, Telpha Z, but
right. It could be this Telpha Z star system. It didn't have to, be a galaxy. Yes, I noticed that too. That was painful.
Very painful.
And it's jarring too as you read these and you come across those little faux pas. They begin to add up in your brain. At least they did for me.
I was screaming.
Yes, and it was like being poked in the chest. Oh,
yes.
Not another one. Oh, God, not another one. Oh, another one. Videotape. Oh.
Yeah. The Enterprise nacelles and the impulse engine. It's literally a rocket. They even call it a rocket.
Oh, God, I know.
And it has the flames coming out the back. In one episode, it not just the nacelle or the impulse, but the shuttle bay is spewing out as if it's a rocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one thing, and I thought this kind of made sense. In issue 3, I start noticing landing parties have backpacks.
Oh, I noticed that too.
And I'm like, well, I got to think, no, they never really have a backpack. They might in, here or there episodes of the original series. But if you think about it, I don't know how long I'm going to be down here. I might need provisions, food, water. A backpack makes a lot of sense, but still wasn't canon.
No.
Issue 3, Spock is looking at a film reel. Give me videotape.
Yeah, video's better than a film reel, right?
Right. Let's see. I'm just flying through here. Issue 4. There's paper printout.
Nice.
McCoy is there. Of course, again, he has the same color shirt as Kirk, and it seems that Spock is the only one that gets any color. He must be the star of the show. Which, a lot of ways I like that idea, but that's not real. Now, in issue 4, The Peril of Planet Quick Change. What a title. It's like Superman going into a telephone booth. There's a concept that's used later on in Star Trek 3, which is this rapidly aging planet. My science background had me screaming at issue 5. Again, we're talking galaxy, Zelta, which is silly, but they're talking about time. How long is it going to take to get there? And they talk about lunar miles, lunar sun. To
lunar
describe
sun.
Yeah, I don't have any idea at all what it would even mean. But
that's horrible. I feel like someone just hit me in the head.
Well, I felt dumber after this issue.
That's a good way of, yes, that's a really good way of how you feel when you're done reading these.
Right. I get to issue 6, When Planets Collide, page 1. I'm like screaming, finally, the bridge looks like something from the original series. And Kirk's in his chair. There's the control panels that kind of circling. And then I look at the foreground, and it looks like a submarine again.
Oh.
And they had it. They didn't have to do any of that crap. They could have just left it that way, and I would have been happy with that background shot. And no.
You know what's really interesting, too, is as these hit the newsstands, it appears that there was very little oversight from Desilu. Nobody from Desilu was looking at these going, hey, it's not a submarine, guys. Can you fix that? And we know that the guys over at Gold Key were pretty proud of themselves because when in our interview with Doug Drexler, who met these guys in the 70s, they were kind of like, hey, have you seen our comic book about Star Trek? Did you love it or what? And if you remember, Drexler was like, no, we didn't like it. You guys don't know what you're doing. So, yeah there's that. Yeah.
Issue 10, Scepter of the Sun, make a really cool reference here to the eugenics war. And they specifically say this group of humans on another planet, they say they come from the year 1997. They say the great eugenics war was raging across the face of the world at the time, and we were part of a small peace movement that tried to stem the destructive tide. But then they gave up and they built a ship and escaped.
Is it my turn yet? Because I'm having a hard time containing myself. All right,
getting close. Okay, right. 11. The brain shocker is called. Spock talks about the origin of the Vulcan philosophy. Vulcans developed a device to remove emotions, and they put the emotions in a bottle. But they found that removing the emotions dimmed that elusive spark called the soul. So they destroyed the device and decided to go with teaching logic instead.
They put emotions in a bottle.
Yeah, this was the whole premise of the whole issue.
It's really okay.
Yeah, so I don't the Enterprise is transporting these bottles to a safe location. The 15 museum at the end of time had Klingons. Now the Klingons were dressed exactly like Vietnam War soldiers. Exactly.
What?
Yes.
Hold on. I didn't read that one, so I'm looking at it real quick. Oh, come on.
The face is a little different, but the outfit looks just like what you see like a Vietnam
oh my God.
Soldier.
Look at that. They're wearing khaki green with, it looks like a ammunition slung across their shoulders and waist. Oh, come on. That does not look anything like the uniforms that we saw in the original series.
Right. Nothing at all.
And they've also got, the one guy's got a Spock haircut. Straight across the, this is just. just hurts me to look at it.
I know. Now this episode, I keep saying
I know
that.
you do.
I
think that's funny.
This issue is very similar to the animated series, The Time Trap. So they kind of get sucked into this time warp type thing in both the animated series and this issue. And Klingons are in both as well. So
that's interesting.
So I'll let you rant for a bit.
Yeah, okay. First of all, let me say that the best thing about the Gold Key comics is that they ended in 1978.
Amen.
Let me start off by saying that. I will say the other thing I really, really liked was in one issue that I read, there's a female officer who wears a Kelly green uniform. Now, I've never seen a Kelly green Star Trek female uniform before, and it was on a blonde woman, so it looked really good. And I have to say, hats off, guys. That was a winner. All right, here's everything else. Let me start with a sequel to the Star Trek episode Metamorphosis. If you remember, that's the sequel. That's the episode where we get to meet Zephyr Cochrane and the adventure with the companion. So Gold Key does this sequel. The crew of the Enterprise needs Cochrane's help in using the warp drive to go do something that, whatever. So we go and we see Zephyr Cochrane again. However, Zephyr Cochrane does not look like the Zephyr Cochrane we got to know in the original series. He's got white hair. Halfway up from his ear to the top of his head, it's gone. And then there's a massive comb over going backwards. He is a late middle-aged man. Whereas Cochrane in the original series was what? In mid-30s? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that they were going to begin to age naturally when the companion, merged with Commissioner Hedford. However, this is only a few years later then, we can assume. And he shouldn't be a aging middle-aged man with losing his hair. So I had a real problem with the way he looked. That was like one of the first things I read that I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Issue 24, Kirk was being framed and facing a court-martial. Now, we've seen a scenario like this in the episode Court-Martial. In that episode, if you remember, he hired a lawyer, he lawyered up, and he fought the charges. In this particular situation, Kirk runs. He escapes. He runs to a doctor and has his face changed to hide out so he can't be found until he can clear himself. And as part of this new look,
wait for it,
Kirk has an afro. Yes, that's right. I said an afro. I couldn't believe it. I can't even. It's issue 24. Go get a copy. Search it online. Kirk has an afro. Okay, I don't know what else to really say about that, so let's move on.
Hold on, I gotta catch my breath.
The last issue, issue 61, has an adventure with Harry Mudd. It's actually sort of readable. However, it still has some major problems. As you pointed out in your issue with the Klingons, there's a new issue with the Klingons in issue 61. Instead of wearing the traditional uniform, the black and kind of gold stuff that they had on in the original series, they're wearing what looks like 70s leisure wear. It looks like he's got a T-shirt with a gold chain and a silk robe, a flowing silk robe. I'm not kidding. It's kind of flowery. It's kind of different looking. And I'm looking at this going, these are Klingons? What? These aren't Klingons.
No.
These are dudes that hang out. He's ready to order a martini at a disco.
Oh my.
Yeah, not good.
Oh my.
I liked issue 33 a little bit. In issue 33, Kirk fights a version of himself. Now, this new version of himself is not from an alternate universe like the Mirror Universe, but from an earlier version of the universe. So catch this. This is the logic that was used in the story, and I actually thought it was a little inventive. The universe, we know, there was a big bang, the universe came into being. Apparently, that's not the first time. The universe expands and contracts, and big bangs again. Expands and contracts, big bangs again. This is the theory put forward in this particular Star Trek Gold Key comic book issue. Captain Kirk, from the previous universe that was here before the one we're living in today, decided to have himself put into suspended animation and put into this area of space that still exists between the universes, out of time. And the Enterprise finds him, and they bring this cylinder aboard, they open it up, and of course, oh my God, it's Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk is wearing a blue uniform top with red pants. And he has come into this new universe with our crew because he wants to find the person who can make the tough decision. I don't know. I started going mind numb after all of this because it was kind of like, wait a minute. Captain Kirk and Captain Kirk from a universe billions of years ago. Okay, it was all getting kind of weird. So we'll just leave it at that. But that was one that sort of stood out. So, I mean, I don't really want to do a blow-by-blow because there's so many things. What this run really suffers from, number one, is none of these characters that we have gotten to know so well through syndication on every day acts like themselves. Kirk doesn't act like Kirk. Spock doesn't really act like Spock or speak like Spock. There's a point where they beam down to a planet where it's rich in dilithium, and McCoy says, hey, let's get that mining gear and go after it. McCoy doesn't care about mining. Maybe Scotty would say that, or somebody else.
Right, blonde-haired Scotty.
Blonde-haired Scotty, that's right. There's a point in one of the issues where they're having a conversation, and Spock is sitting in an armchair with his arms resting on the arms of the chair. And his legs are crossed. And he's slouching. He's slouching in the chair like I might do. The only thing missing is a can of Colt 45 in his hand. And a cigarette in the other. I mean, I'm not kidding. That's what it looks like. It looks like he's ready to have a beer and a smoke while he's talking with his bros.
I know.
Very un-Spock-like. And his speech patterns are very familiar rather than the formal way that Spock spoke in the series.
Yeah.
So none of these characters behave like themselves. That's the first thing I noticed. They're not even close copies. They're distant copies. And they appear in name only, really. Rather than be true to who the characters were in the series, these creators decided to make the characters very malleable, and they shaped the characters to fit whatever situation that the writers dreamed up for that particular issue. I don't remember seeing Captain Kirk behave heroically as he did in episode to episode in the original series.
No,
did you?
Right.
Did you ever?
No, again, I'll go back to my theme of I really think they thought Spock was the main character. Because Spock, I would see do that occasionally. It seemed like all focus was on Spock.
You might be right. I mean, maybe later on in some of the later issues I read, it shifted a little bit. But I think you might be right. Maybe in the earlier issues that you read, Spock was.
And I looked at it a little bit too from a time perspective. When were these published? And I thought, okay, the first few, and they were spread out across time. There weren't that many done. Like in 67, one issue, 68, they put out 2 issues. 69, they put out 3 issues. 70, they only did 2 issues. The first couple years, okay, I get it, because syndication isn't in full bloom right yet, and they don't have these readily available to watch necessarily.
But
right?
They do, by the mid-'70s and later. By 74, 75.
Even by 70.
I was you're right. I was being gracious, but you're right. By 71, you can find Star Trek and take a look and see what it is you're writing about.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I hope everybody listening understands, I'm not a purist. I've said before, hey, any Star Trek is better than no Star Trek. I like the format. I like the idea of the situations. JJ verse is different than the Star Trek I grew up with, but I can adjust. It's all good, But I gotta tell you, now I would have to say any Star Trek is better than no Star Trek, except Gold Key. These stories are lazy. The creators, I just feel like they did no research. They didn't try to stay true to the original source material at all. I mean, yeah, tell me if you got this impression. I felt like the writers of the Gold Key comics looked at Star Trek as though it was the next version of Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers.
Right.
Kind of just that 30s view of science fiction. Hey, this is what I grew up with. This is what science fiction is. It's just a different looking rocket ship and a different looking gun, but it's really the same thing. Because that's how these stories come across. Do you think so too?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I kept thinking of, when I was a kid, I'd pick up any sci-fi, right, or watch any sci-fi, and I used to watch those Flash Gordon serials.
Yes,
relentlessly.
I enjoyed them because you know what? I knew that they were old.
Yep.
I knew they were from the 30s with, they didn't have special effects really, but I enjoyed them for what they were.
Right, me too. And I looked at each one of these, and I kept thinking, Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Except Flash Gordon was 10 times better.
Yeah. Yes, because it was the original.
Right.
And it was more inventive. Yeah. These stories, they emphasized ray guns and ships and way out unbelievable stories over the thought-provoking morality plays that we saw on Star Trek during the 70s. So, I mean, as a result, these stories are just that. They're unbelievable. I found them difficult to read. And
yes.
at times just downright objectionable. I was insulted by the stories, and that these writers would take my beloved characters and create these stories around them. I was insulted, and it was objectionable, and I didn't like it at all.
And what's worse, it was very, very painful. If you've never read them, it was very painful.
And I know that there are fans of Star Trek that have collected Gold Key and like Gold Key and can accept Gold Key comics for what they are. And to you folks, if you're listening, I say you're finding something in there that I didn't find. And so more power to you. I'm only giving you my point of view, and Kelly's only giving you his point of view. And if you find them nostalgic or quaint in their own way, I get that. I can see that. I find them objectionable. I'm sorry. That's just where I'm coming from. If you're a fan of comics and you're a fan of Star Trek, then I think you should go read the Marvel, DC, or IDW comic books, because they do such a better job of, of just staying true to the source material.
Well, being in the ballpark.
Yes. Being in the ballpark, having stories that are relatable to what Star Trek was in the 60s.
Yeah, characters that are true to the character.
Next week, we open the cover and look inside what was the first major fan-produced reference book, the Star Trek Concordance. Next week.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.